Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy today's video. Enjoy watching.
I was drunk at a high school party and ended up having a one-night stand with the most popular guy in our class. A month later, I discovered I was pregnant. To my surprise, he proposed to me, but it wasn't out of love. After we got married, I lost the baby, but our marriage continued, albeit a cold and unaffectionate one. 2 years later, I found out that he hadn't married me for love, but to fulfill his grandfather's dying wish. To make matters worse, he was in love with another woman. That's when I decided I wanted a divorce. That night, after we made love, I told him, "Matteo, we should get a divorce." My voice was soft, but I could feel his body tense up in my arms. Matteo looked at me calmly and asked, "Why?" I replied, "We got married for the baby, but the baby's gone. To be honest, I'm used to being alone. Without you, it feels the same, but without you, I wouldn't have all these expectations and frustrations." I thought he probably felt the same way. After the divorce, he wouldn't have to deal with my family, and I wouldn't have to deal with his. Matteo didn't say anything, just looked at me silently. His brown eyes darkened, and I thought he wasn't going to respond, but then he nodded silently. "Okay," he said, just like when he agreed to marry me. I smiled, holding back tears, and gently buried my head in his chest, hugging him one last time. Matteo didn't react, just let me hold him in silence. Then, I carefully got up and said, "I'm going to take a shower." Just as I was about to get out of bed, someone grabbed my arm and pulled me back onto the mattress. Matteo kissed me forcefully, but when he saw the panic in my eyes, he stopped. His eyes were full of anger, but he slowly calmed down, turned over, and lay down beside me. "Sleep," he said, closing his eyes. The next morning, when I woke up, Matteo was gone. I started packing my things before leaving. I took one last look at the house where I had lived for 2 years, left the keys and divorce papers on the table, and sent Matteo a message. "I've signed the divorce papers and left them on the table. I've asked Don Suarez to take care of everything. When you have time, finalize the divorce. Take care, Matteo." Matteo was in a meeting when he received the message. He was paralyzed, and no one in the room had ever seen him like that. His secretary, Lucia, who had known him for years, whispered, "Sir, are you okay?" Matteo looked at her sideways, put his phone down calmly, and continued talking, but then suddenly said, "The meeting is over." He took his phone and left the room in a hurry. The others looked at each other, confused. What's wrong with Mr. Brack? Matteo went straight home, something he never did during work hours. The house was clean, but there was no sign of me, just the divorce papers on the table, moving slightly in the breeze. Matteo picked them up, lost in thought. After a while, he heard the soft sound of a door opening. Matteo suddenly turned his head towards the door, and his mother, Selena, walked in, startled to see him move so abruptly. "What's going on?" she asked, confused. Matteo didn't respond, just looked at her coldly. Selena smiled and said, "I came to keep you company because I thought you might be bored and alone at home." Matteo looked at her and said, "She's fine." Selena frowned, noticing the tension in the air. "Why are you home so early today?" Matteo didn't answer, just kept looking at the divorce papers in his hand. Selena tried to take them from him, but he held them firmly. "It's nothing important," Matteo said, looking at Selena. "You don't need to be here. Nadia has her own things to take care of. When we have time, I'll take her to see you." Selena wanted to say something, but instead, she quickly replied, "Okay." However, she couldn't help but remind Matteo, Nadia has been resting for over a year, but she still hasn't gotten pregnant. It could be the effect of the miscarriage. She should get a checkup. Matteo responded, "I don't want kids." Selena looked at him, astonished. Matteo continued, "You can tell me now, but if it's not urgent, don't come back." Selena opened her mouth to protest, but under Matteo's cold gaze, she remained silent and turned to leave. Matteo watched as the door closed, and then he sighed deeply, took his phone, and dialed his assistant's number. "Schedule a meeting with Mr. Harvey to handle my divorce." He hung up, threw the divorce papers on the table, and left the house. I had moved back to my small house on the outskirts of town, the same one I had bought before getting married. It was in that small place where Mateo and I had our one-night stand, and where I got pregnant, which eventually led to our marriage. But now that I was divorcing him, I thought he probably felt relieved. I took my phone and called the real estate agent who had helped me buy the house. "Hello, I want to sell my house in Chinsandiai. Can you help me with the process?" 2 days later, Horace saw my house listed for sale online. He couldn't help but take a look. Mateo was sitting in his office, and Horace knew that Mateo and I had separated, but as far as Horace knew, Mateo and I had always had a good relationship. We weren't the type of couple who showed much affection in public, but we hadn't reached the point of hating each other. Horace didn't understand why we had divorced so suddenly. In the past few days, Mateo hadn't been acting like a typical divorced person with a broken heart, except for that one time when he left the meeting room visibly affected. Everything seemed the same, but Mateo had been spending even more time in the office and had become more demanding with work. Horace felt that the divorce was starting to affect him. He didn't want to keep working in such a heavy atmosphere, but he was trapped in a dilemma. Suddenly, Mateo looked up from his computer screen and stared at Horace. "What's going on?" Horace was startled. "Nothing," he replied. "Then why are you looking at me like that?" Mateo asked, his brow furrowed. Horace hesitated, but Mateo insisted, "Speak up." Finally, Horace gritted his teeth and turned his phone screen towards Mateo. "No one is buying the house. It's possible she's leaving." When Horace showed me the screen of his cell phone, I felt like the air was escaping from my lungs. There was my house, our house, listed for sale like it was a simple object without value. Although I already knew that Nadia was determined to leave, seeing the listing hit me in a way I didn't expect. It was like reality was slapping me, reminding me that what we had, what I thought was under control, was crumbling completely. I remained silent for a few seconds, staring at the photo of the facade, the same facade where 2 years ago I had decided that fulfilling my grandfather's will was more important than following my heart. "Do you know anything else?" I asked Horace, although my tone probably scared him. He quickly shook his head, but his nervous gaze told me that he would rather be anywhere else at that moment. I stood up from my desk with a sudden movement, and my chair rolled several meters backward. I needed to get out, I needed answers, and what I needed most was to face Nadia. I grabbed my coat and car keys, ignoring Horace's questions as I left the office. The drive to the house was a mix of memories, guilt, and something I didn't want to admit, fear. The road to the house was short, but every second inside the car felt endless. Memories hit me one after another, as if the past itself wanted to reproach me for everything I had done wrong. The first time I saw that house was when Nadia bought it before everything began. She showed me every corner with a mix of pride and nervousness, as if she feared I would judge her. I never said anything, but secretly, I loved it. Every detail seemed to scream her personality, the yellow curtains that let in too much light, the gray sofa she chose because it was comfortable, not beautiful. Now, seeing it for sale was like a part of me was being torn away. When I arrived, the silence hit me like a punch in the gut. The house was empty, but not in the physical sense. It was that kind of emptiness that leaves the absence of someone who really filled the space. I opened the door with my key, although I felt I no longer had the right to use it. The echo of my footsteps resonated as I walked down the hallway. Everything was the same, but different. The walls seemed grayer, the air heavier, and in the living room, on the small wooden table, I found something I didn't expect, a handwritten letter with my name on top. My hands trembled as I picked up the letter. It was a simple paper, without envelopes or decorations, but Nadia's handwriting was unmistakable, round, precise, almost as if each letter had been drawn with care. I sat down on the sofa, that gray sofa I always criticized, and opened the letter. The scent of her perfume, that one that always smelled like lavender and a touch of lemon, hit me before I even read the first word. "Mateo, I don't know if these lines will have any meaning for you, but for me, they're a way to close a chapter that shouldn't have begun. During these 2 years, I've tried to be what you wanted, what your family expected, but I always knew it wasn't enough. I saw it in your eyes from the first day, and I felt it every night in the coldness of your hug. I don't blame you, we both entered this for the wrong reasons. But I don't want to keep being a shadow in my own life. We deserve something better, even if it's apart. Take care, Nadia. I read those words at least 3 times before I could process them. My chest felt like someone was squeezing it with force. There were so many things I wanted to say to her, but it was too late. The letter wasn't just a goodbye, it was a sentence. And the worst part was that she was right. I couldn't stay seated there with the letter in my hands and the echo of her words hammering my head. I got up almost by impulse and walked towards our bedroom, or what was left of it. The closet was half empty, her clothes gone, but her presence still lingered. That red dress she used to wear on special occasions was no longer hanging on the hook, but its image appeared in my mind like a ghost. I walked over to the dresser and saw that only a few small objects were left behind, a broken mirror she never wanted to replace, and a small silver bracelet I had once given her, now seeming like a forgotten relic. I wondered if she had left the bracelet on purpose, as a silent message. Was it a symbol of all the things I had destroyed, or had it simply lost its meaning for her? My mind was racing as I walked through the house, every corner holding something of hers, something that now seemed to scream her absence. The kitchen still smelled of her favorite coffee, the one she said gave her a bit of life in the mornings, but the cup she used to drink from was gone. It was as if she had ripped out every piece of herself, leaving only the shadows of what we once shared. I sat down at the kitchen table, dropping my head into my hands. How had we ended up like this? There were so many things I could have said, so many decisions that could have been different, but what was the point of thinking about that now? My fingers drummed against the wood as my gaze drifted towards the window. The small garden that no one tended to with such care seemed abandoned, as if the flowers themselves had decided to wither away with her departure. There was a rose bush, her favorite, still blooming. She always said roses were stubborn, that they could survive almost anything. For a moment, I felt like that rose bush was like her, strong, persistent, but also full of thorns I had never fully understood. Suddenly, my phone vibrated on the table, breaking the silence like a thunderclap. It was Harrison. I answered without thinking, more out of instinct than a desire to talk. Sorry to disturb you, but I just received a notification that no one has signed the papers for the sale of the house. It seems she's moving out in the next few days. That phrase hit me like a bucket of cold water, moving out. Where to? Before I could process what he was saying, I interrupted him. Do you know where she's going? I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. No, sir, but I can investigate if you want. I hung up, my throat constricting with a mix of anger, frustration, and a stab of fear. The knot in my throat grew bigger, and no matter how hard I tried to swallow it, it wouldn't disappear. I got up abruptly, leaving the chair scraping against the floor, and walked out of the house. I needed air, but even the wind seemed to remind me of her. I walked towards the car, but didn't start the engine. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and my mind couldn't stop imagining her in some distant place, maybe starting anew without me. How could I have let things go this far? I thought about looking for her, having her back, but with what right? No one had given me any signs for a long time, but I had convinced myself that everything was fine, that we could keep going on indefinitely. The sound of a message interrupted my thoughts, a social media notification, something I rarely checked. But this time, I opened it almost without wanting to. Someone had updated their status, a simple phrase, "Second chances are for the brave." I stared at the screen, paralyzed. Was that what she was doing? Looking for a new opportunity, far from everything we had built, or rather, everything we had pretended to build? I felt small, insignificant. She was brave, always had been, even when I reduced her to a secondary role in my life. And now she was out there, fighting for something better, while I only knew how to run or hide behind my excuses. I started the car without a clear destination, knowing only that I had to move, do something, anything to get out of that feeling of powerlessness. I drove aimlessly, wandering through streets that seemed endless, until I found myself at the park where Nadia and I had had our first official date. Although our marriage had been a product of circumstance, there had been genuine moments between us, moments when she looked at me with a mix of hope and something deeper that I never knew how to reciprocate. The park was almost empty, except for a couple of children playing on the swings and an elderly couple sitting on a bench. I got out of the car and walked to our favorite spot, a worn wooden bench under an old oak tree. I sat down, letting the cool breeze hit my face, and closed my eyes. For a moment, everything came back, her soft laughter, the scent of her perfume, the way she intertwined her fingers with mine when she thought no one was looking. I opened my eyes abruptly, unable to bear those memories any longer. As I sat on the bench, weighed down by memories, I picked up a book that was lying there. It was a collection of poems, a book that no one usually read. When I wanted to escape the chaos of our life together, I would open it at random. And there it was, a poem underlined with a familiar stroke. It said something about lost love, about the strength to move forward when everything seemed to be falling apart. The words were a direct hit to my chest, and I couldn't help but think that maybe the universe was sending me a message, although I wasn't sure what it was, a sign to let her go, or a push to try to win her back. I sat there with the book in my hands, feeling more vulnerable than ever. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry, the tears falling silently as if they had been waiting for this moment to emerge. It was a mix of pain, regret, and above all, a crushing certainty. I had lost her, not because of circumstance, but because of my own decisions. When I finally got up from the bench, I felt like I was carrying a new weight, but also a clarity that I had never had before. I got back in the car with the book in my hand, unable to leave it behind. As I drove back, the city lights twinkling like a reminder that the world was still spinning, regardless of what was happening in my head. I decided to do something I had avoided for a long time, face my feelings and let someone know the truth, even if it was too late. I arrived at her new house just before nightfall, the "for sale" sign no longer there, and a moving truck parked in the entrance, indicating that she was unpacking. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to gather the courage to knock on the door. Finally, I got out with the book clutched to my chest. When Nadia opened the door, her expression changed from surprise to confusion. Her hair was tied back, and she was wearing a simple shirt, but her eyes, those eyes that I had ignored so many times, looked at me with a mix of exhaustion and curiosity. "Matteo," her voice was soft but loaded with incredulity. I didn't blame her, I myself didn't know exactly what I was doing there. I handed her the book without saying a word. She took it, looking at it with attention, and then raised her eyes to mine. "I found it in the park," I said finally, with a lump in my throat. "I thought maybe it belonged to you." Nadia opened the book and saw the underlined poem. Her expression changed, and there was something in her gaze, as if those verses had touched a wound that still hadn't healed. "It's mine," she admitted, almost in a whisper. "I left it there on purpose. I didn't think anyone would find it, let alone you." Her confession left me speechless. She had left the book in that place as a symbolic goodbye, as if she was trying to close a cycle that I didn't know was still open. The idea that even her smallest gestures were loaded with meaning hit me with force. "Why did you leave it?" I asked, although I feared the answer. Nadia sighed and stepped aside to let me in, closing the door behind me. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she spoke, her voice calm and sure. "Because I needed to let go of everything, Matteo. Let go of you, let go of what we were or what we pretended to be. That book accompanied me in the toughest moments, but I don't want to carry it anymore. I don't want to carry you anymore." Her words were like knives, each one cutting a little deeper, but I couldn't blame her. She was right, and I knew it. I approached the small living room, where boxes were still unpacked and piled up in the corners. Everything in that place screamed new beginnings, and I was the intruder who didn't belong there. "Nadia, I started, but she raised her hand, stopping me. "Don't say anything, Matteo. If you've come to apologize, it's too late. The only thing I want to know is why now? Why decide to look for me just when I'm learning to live without you?" Nadia's question left me paralyzed. It wasn't something I could answer easily, and I knew that any excuse would sound empty. I took a deep breath and looked her in the eye, those eyes that always had a spark that I never quite understood. Because I'm an idiot, Nadia. Because I thought that what we had could be maintained with routine, with agreements, without realizing that I was losing you. I didn't come to ask you to come back to me. I came because I needed to tell you that I'm sorry for being so blind, so insensitive. My voice broke, and I forced myself to continue. I never valued you as you deserved. You were always more than just a compromise to me, but I never showed it. Nadia observed me in silence, her expression hard, but in her eyes, there was something more, something I couldn't decipher. She crossed her arms and turned her back on me, walking towards one of the open boxes. She pulled out a photograph, us two on our wedding day. It wasn't a happy photo. Our smiles were forced, and our eyes told different stories. She showed me the photo, holding it in front of me. Look at us, Mateo. This is what we were. Two people who didn't even know how to fit into each other's lives. I tried with all my might, but you were never really there. I couldn't look away from the photo, every detail that I had previously ignored now seeming impossible to avoid. Her dress was slightly wrinkled because no one had bothered to help her fix it. My posture was rigid, as if I was posing for a magazine instead of embracing the woman who was supposed to be my partner in life. That image was a cruel reflection of what we had been, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. You're right, I said finally, my voice low but firm. I wasn't there. I always saw you as something I had to manage, a compromise to fulfill, but I didn't realize what it really meant until it was too late. Nadia put the photo on the table and turned towards me. For the first time, I saw something like sadness in her expression, but also a determination that I knew I couldn't break. Mateo, don't torture yourself. This situation has no culprits. It was a mistake from the beginning. We were both in a place where we thought fulfilling expectations was enough, but it wasn't. Now, I just want to move forward, and I think you should too. I nodded slowly, knowing that she was right. There was nothing more to say, but the words were stuck in my throat, fighting to come out. I looked down at the floor, unable to hold her gaze for any longer. Everything in that moment made me feel small, insignificant, as if I was facing something that I couldn't change, no matter how hard I tried. Is there anything else you want to say? Nadia asked, her tone neutral, almost cold. I shook my head, knowing that I had nothing left to say. Although I opened my mouth, the emotions would only end up spilling out, and I didn't want that. Before leaving, I spoke barely above a whisper. I hope you find what you're looking for, Nadia. You deserve it. She didn't respond. I only heard the faint creaking of the floor as she walked away towards the kitchen. I left the house, leaving the book and the memories behind. When I closed the door, I felt like a part of me was trapped in that space, a fragment that I could never recover. I got into the car with the sensation that the air had become denser, almost unbearable. As I started the engine, my mind went back to those words that Nadia had said, we should both move forward. How could I move forward when everything that was worth anything seemed to be left behind? But although it hurt to admit it, I knew it was true. We had built something on such fragile foundations that the slightest movement had brought it down. I drove without a clear destination, just letting the road guide me. I ended up parked in front of a lookout point that I used to visit when I needed to think. From there, the view of the city shone like a million unfulfilled promises. I sat still, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I thought about what Nadia had said about letting go, about closing chapters. Maybe this was the moment to do it, to really let go. I took my phone and called Harrison. He answered on the second ring, his voice professional but with a hint of caution. What can I do for you, Mr. BR? He asked. I took a deep breath before responding. I want you to finalize everything related to the sale of the house and the divorce papers. I don't want anyone to have to worry about anything else. Make sure everything is handled quickly and without complications. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, as if Harrison didn't know what to say. Finally, he spoke with caution. Understood, Mr. BR. I'll make sure everything is handled as you requested. I hung up without saying goodbye, and let the phone fall onto the passenger seat. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like a truce within myself. I had made the decision to let go, but not as an act of resignation, but as a step forward. Maybe I could never make up for what I had done wrong with Nadia, but at least I could ensure that she had a clean path to start anew, without me being a shadow in her life. The fresh breeze from the lookout point began to calm me as I watched the city lights twinkle in the distance. It was a cruel contrast, a world full of life, while I felt empty, as if something inside me had broken forever. But somehow, that emptiness also brought clarity. I remembered Nadia's words, her firmness, her decision not to let our past define her. If she could do it, maybe I could too. I could find a way to rebuild myself, even if everything seemed lost in that moment. Before starting the car to leave, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my own reflection. I looked like a stranger, a man I didn't recognize, but behind that tired gaze and those red eyes, there was a spark of determination. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could try to be someone better, not for Nadia, but for myself. As I drove away from the lookout point, the weight in my chest began to dissipate. Although I knew that a scar would remain, the road back was silent, but this time, the silence wasn't unbearable, but necessary. I arrived at my apartment, that impersonal space that I had never felt like home, and as I entered, I noticed something different. The feeling of emptiness was still there, but it no longer tormented me. I took out the book that I had found in the park, now almost like a symbol of everything that Nadia and I had shared and lost. I placed it on a shelf, not as a reminder of what didn't work, but as a reminder of the lesson that it had taught me. Sometimes, letting go isn't giving up, but the most courageous act one can do.